Pete Carroll has been tossed out of the Seahawks nest. Did you see this? No, maybe not. We were worried about Nick Saban. Nick Saban also out. Well, before Nick Saban, it was revealed, is out in Tuscaloosa, the news came down from Seattle that Pete Carroll has been kicked out the door. He will no longer coach the Seahawks after 14 seasons. The NFL's oldest coach made the postseason 10 times in Seattle. And the greatest moment in Seattle sports history, the Super Bowl championship for the iconic Legion of Boom defense back in the day, many years ago. So the owner of the team, she got the team because the guy that did own the team, Paul Allen, died, Jody Allen, and she issued a prepared statement. Now, we love our prepared statements, but it was likely written by the hand of a PR person, but nonetheless, said after a thoughtful meeting and careful consideration, we decided to make a change for the best interest of the franchise. Of course, remember, best interest of the franchise is the sports version of out of an abundance of caution. Remember a couple years back during the pandemic there, you can do anything you wanted, just say out of an abundance of caution. And in sports, you can do anything you want as long as you say, we are doing this in the best interest of the franchise. That's all you have to say. Now, Pete Carroll and Seattle had a winning record this year. They were 9-8, but as we mentioned, they did not qualify for the playoffs. Second time in 3 years that Seattle has been on the outside looking in through the glass there. Now, the team did announce that Pete Carroll will remain with the team, but they did not say exactly what he'll be doing. They say it's an advisory role, whatever that means. So let us discuss the question. Give me your school of thought on Pete Carroll's departure, his departure from Seattle. So I've got circus cannon, Butterfingers, and Salisbury steak. And we will combine all of these things together, and we are going to make a napkin or a tissue, because Pete needed a tissue. He needed a napkin. I don't know if you saw any of this, but my goodness. All right, number one. So Pete Carroll got up to the dais, the bully pulpit, and he's addressing the media there in Seattle. Of course, not wearing team gear because he's no longer working for the team. And you could tell right away that Pete was coerced into doing this, that he is not leaving under his terms. He's leaving under the terms of the Seahawks. They were trying to present this as a mutual decision, but it really wasn't a mutual decision. There's like, well, it's not that bad. It's not all that. But Pete Carroll was a glass case of emotion. And he was crying. I think we have some of that of him. Do we have the one of him crying here? Listen to Pete here as he said, hey, listen. In fact, there's a drop. I heard this earlier. I was watching the news conference, and Pete said this is worth crying for. He said this is worth crying for. That's a drop. So God only knows. No one's ever heard this who works here. So I heard it, but I didn't document the sound. So anyway, we'll just play it and see what we find. Here's Pete Carroll from his news conference.
Following our season-ending meetings with ownership, it's clear, and for a variety of reasons, we have mutually agreed to set a new course for the club to take on new leadership.
All right. Well, he wasn't crying on that one. All right, play another one. Let's see if he's crying. We got to find the one he's crying in.
It's been an honor and a thrill to be part of this program, and I've loved every minute of it, and you've watched me love it.
Yeah. Now, he was talking about his wife, and then he says, that's worth crying. That's worth crying for.
I think at the end there, he was getting a little choked up, right?
No. All right, anyway, so we don't have the one of him crying, but trust me, he did. It's all over the internet. You can find it in 2 seconds, but apparently we can't find it. All right, so now Pete Carroll, immediately after the Cardinal game on Sunday, he talked to the media, and we mentioned this on the air Sunday night into Monday. Pete had said that he planned to continue coaching the Seahawks. He then reiterated on Monday. He does a weekly radio show that 7 people listen to on some station that we're not on. So he went on the radio show and reiterated that he intended to be the coach of the Seattle Seahawks. 2 days later, a hastily announced news conference Pete Carroll kicked out of Seattle, but will remain with the franchise as an advisor. So Pete Carroll, here's what happened. Carroll was put into a circus cannon and shot out of the big top. He was put into the circus cannon and shot out of the big top here. He was just verklempt. He was verklempt here at this news conference. Now, Pete did not bite his tongue. We played some of the worst sound bites, but trust me. He admitted that he competed pretty hard to remain Seattle's coach. He also started crying when talking about his wife and people around him and all that stuff. He then ultimately said that we went along with their intentions, meaning the ownership side, which I don't even think is ownership. I think there's somebody else, the GM or somebody there in Seattle, because the owner, she's pretty hands-off from what I've heard. Jody Allen, she's not really doing much. It's the people around her. Somebody got her ear and convinced her that Pete Carroll had to go. And she signed off on it, and she said, that's it, we're good. And so is this barbarian-level cruelty? No, it is not barbarian-level cruelty that Pete Carroll is no longer coaching. It's a football coach. You can change coaches. He doesn't own the team. If you don't own the team, you can't, you can't be the person that's upset that this happens. Is it vile? Is it venomous, the way Pete Carroll was kicked out of Seattle? In this case, though, all roads lead to the whistle, as in you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. You got to take your whistle and go home. You're no longer coaching. Now, the second part of this, what exactly went wrong? What went wrong for Pete Carroll in Seattle? So another one is we talked about Nick Saban in an earlier hour on the show. We mentioned, well, Nick, when you get to a certain age, people say, well, that's it. You can't get it done. The birth certificate, and Pete Carroll's in his 70s. That's a problem. It's a problem if you're not winning 10-plus games. And when you're young, it's always like the old line, when you're young in sports and you have been tagged as a good player, right? You've been tagged as a good player, and then you have kind of a down season. Your numbers aren't that good. What do people say? They say it's a learning experience. You stub your toe, but it's a learning experience. Growing pains. They use the phrase growing pains. But then when you get to your 70s and you have a bad year, they are ready to put you into a hospital gurney and just roll you away and get rid of you. But it's deeper than that, because if you say, how about some names? I need names. Well, if you'd ask who's responsible for the demise of Pete Carroll, other than the age thing, let's start with Russell Wilson. I know Russ has been gone for a bit there, a couple years. He's been out. But Russell Wilson has some culpability in this, because once the Legion of Boom aged out and they got rid of that great defense in Seattle, the assumption was that Russell Wilson would step into the elevator and ascend as a all-pro level quarterback. He never smelled like it. He never tasted or smelled all-pro status in the NFL. He didn't. And certainly not in Seattle. He got progressively worse, not better. There were also issues between Carroll and Russ, as Russ went Hollywood or something like that. And so Russ ends up falling out of sorts, and then, Butterfingers drops the baton, right? Butterfingers Wilson, he's supposed to take the baton from the Legion of Boom. He doesn't do that. So they have the falling out, traded Denver, offloaded for draft picks, and the Seahawks have run the last couple of years without a quarterback. Seattle has not had a quarterback in a couple of years. Geno Smith sucks. Everyone knows that. He blows. He's a backup masquerading as a starter. And so Seattle became moldy. And they're not terrible. They're adequate. Not great. They're like the filler in the hot dog. You just don't want to know it's there. It's okay, but you don't want to really know what's in there. They're a faux contender. Have we done a wellness check on JJ and Renton or Nostradamus or any of our Seahawk fan, Emmett, the blind Seahawk fan? Have we checked in with any of our guys in the Pacific Northwest contingent of the MALLER militia to see how they're handling this? So now Pete Carroll, he had to get up there and play nice for the most part. He did play nice, although he cried a little bit, which kind of gave it the whole thing away. But you look at this as like Pete's now got one of those. I used to love The Sopranos. He's got one of those no-show jobs, one of those no-show construction jobs, where he's a advisor. They don't even know what he's going to be doing. So it's like, we still got to pay you. So we're going to come up with, we're going to come up with some fugazi title for you. All right. Final point as we put the bow on this Pete Carroll conversation. Where does the Seahawks job, where does this rank among available gigs in the NFL? So this job is underwhelming. The Seattle job is underwhelming. Some of the reasons we've already given. They don't have a quarterback, Geno Smith. This roster as a whole, you look at the Seahawks roster, and I tried to explain this to Nostradamus and JJ and Renton. JJ kind of got it. Nostradamus didn't. He didn't get it. But here's the thing. So they're at the roster itself it's like a belly button type situation, right? Because it's in the middle. It's a belly button job because you're in the middle. And who has the inside track? That would be the Salisbury steak man. The guy that went to Salisbury College in Maryland, Dan Quinn. That's obvious. It would be a stunner if Dan Quinn doesn't get the job. He was there in the glory days of Pete Carroll in Seattle as the director of defensive responsibilities for the Legion of Boom. And he ran the Seattle defense there 10, 11 years ago, and then went off to Atlanta, went back to Seattle, and ended up going to Dallas and all that. But you, outside of Dan Quinn, you have a hodgepodge of corporals and lieutenants who want to be the brigadier general.